Our last class of arthropods is the insecta. The insecta are the granddaddy of all classes of anything. There are more classes. The insects are the most successful class of organisms, as far as we know, of all time. Over 1 million described species, and many more that are not described or do not have formal names assigned to them by scientists, by entomologists, people who study insects. Their tagmosis, they have a head, and they have a thorax, and they have an abdomen. So this 3-part tagmosis with these 3 body regions. The thorax is where all of the locomotory structures are found, the wings and the legs. So they might have 0 pairs of wings, a single pair of wings, or most frequently 2 pairs of wings are found in the majority of winged insects. And then every insect has 3 pairs of walking legs. You might say, walking legs, are there other kinds of legs? Matter of fact, there kind of are. The legs that they walk on are walking legs, but then in some larval forms, like caterpillars, like inchworms, for example, you might find pairs of legs that are not true legs, but just kind of loby, fleshy protuberances that are called prolegs, which don't really walk so much as they kind of just wobble along. So there are legs that aren't really legs, but as far as these arthropody legs, jointed legs, they're only going to have 3 pairs or 6 of these legs. So we can divide the insects into 3 broad categories. Ametabolous is the first one, and ametabolous insects go from being an egg to being an adult through a series of stages called instars. And essentially, the difference between an immature and an adult, essentially, it's just size. And you can't really tell if they're sexually mature or not unless they're the largest size that they're going to grow to be. So the immatures look pretty much just like the adults, only smaller. And none of the ametabolous insects have wings. So springtails, they can jump very high up into the air because they have this spring-like apparatus called a furcula on their abdomen, but they don't fly. They don't have wings. Silverfish and firebrats, they are ametabolous insects that they don't have wings. And the young ones look just like the old ones, only smaller. All right, our second broad category of insects are the hemimetabolous insects. Hemimetabolous insects typically have wings or have lost wings if they don't have them. So they're secondarily wingless, meaning their ancestors did have wings. They start out as an egg. They develop as a nymph, which can be distinguished from a mature adult because the nymphs typically have underdeveloped wings. They might just have little wing pads or partially developed and not fully functioning wings. But the adults are the only members of these orders that have functioning wings. So these include things like the true bugs, grasshoppers and crickets and roaches and dragonflies all fall into this category of being hemimetabolous. Naiad is a term that's reserved for the aquatic larvae of things like dragonflies and damselflies. Third broad category of insects, most recently derived of the 3 lineages, because we went in order, are the Holometabolous insects. They start off as an egg. They develop into a larva. The larva will then form a quiescent stage called a pupa. So it's almost like a second type of egg. Not really. But when they're in the pupa, they undergo a dramatic change in the body plan to become an adult, or an imago is the technical term for adults of holometabolous insects. So these include things like flies, beetles, wasps, and ants, and butterflies. Anything that has a caterpillar, or a grub, or a maggot, those are all holometabolous insects. And the larvae look very different from the adults. There are about 30 orders of insects in the world. And I just want to kind of walk you through 7 of the biggest, 7 of the most familiar orders of insects. And I've grouped them, they're not alphabetical here, but they are arranged from the Hemimetabolous and the Holometabolous orders. None of the Ametabolous orders are particularly large, so I'm not going to tell you about them. All right, so damselflies and dragonflies are both in the order Odonata. And you can tell, you probably know what dragonflies look like. Damselflies kind of look like finer versions of dragonflies. They have more thinner, tend to be smaller in body. Damselflies, when they light or when they land on something, they keep their wings along their back. Whereas dragonflies, when they light, they spread their wings out wide like this. The Orthoptera means straight wing. These include grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. Some people include cockroaches as orthopterans. These insects have wing pads that develop in their nymph forms, and then when they get to be full adults, they have these functioning wings. The hemipterans are your true bugs, and they're true bugs in the sense that even entomologists consider them to be bugs. But it's only members of the Hemiptera that are considered to be bugs by entomologists. We don't think that spiders and millipedes and roly-polies and all those things are bugs. But we do have a group of insects that are called bugs. Things like spittle bugs and stink bugs. Those are all true bugs. And how do you know if it's a bug? Typically, what you can look for is this X pattern in the back. And that the reason that they have this X pattern in the back is because of their the thing that is where we get their name, Hemiptera. Hemiptera means half wing, and true bugs often have a sclerotized or a hardened portion of their wing, which you can see here and here, where this spot is. And then they have a membranous end to these 4 wings. So where these hardened parts cross, and the membranous parts, well, the hardened parts don't cross, but the membranous parts cross, and that's what leads to having this X on the back, which indicates that you've got a true bug. All right, moving on to the Holometabolous big orders. The beetles are one of our Holometabolous big orders. The biggest order of insects are the Coleoptera, which means shield wing, because their first set of wings, of the 2 pairs that they have, are hardened to form a protective covering for the insect. So here's the head. Here's the first part of the thorax. This pair of wings is attached to the middle part of the thorax, and then the membranous wings that are underneath here are attached to the third part of the thorax, and then the abdomen is kind of hidden underneath here. So if you've ever been confused by this with beetles and how do you have a head, thorax, and abdomen, it's often because the wings are hiding parts of the abdomen. But they do typically have functioning membranous wings to help them fly underneath these shield wings that they can use to help them balance during flight. The Diptera are the only order of insects that only have 2 wings. That's where the name comes from, Diptera. Diptera means 2 wings. So they have 2 wings, typically membranous wings, and then their hind wings have been adapted into these little drumstick-like structures that are called halteres, which they use to help them balance. And flies, as you probably know if you've ever tried to shoo flies or swat a housefly, are very adept flyers. They're very good at maneuvering in midair because they have these balancing structures in here. This is a crane fly, or you've probably heard it called a mosquito hawk, and you may have been told that you shouldn't kill them because they hunt mosquitoes, and that's actually not true. You shouldn't hurt them because they don't hurt anything. I mean, they're not bad insects. They're not particularly pestiferous or harmful. They're not vectors for diseases, but they're not going to take care of your mosquito problem for you just because they look like giant mosquitoes. The Hemimetabolous are your bees, wasps, and ants, and these are some of the most advanced insects that have social behavior, true social behavior. You've probably heard of a hive of bees having a queen bee that basically runs the whole colony of bees, and that's true. They take care of their young. There's overlapping of generations. There's division of labor, and that's called eusociality, or true social behavior. Oh, one last thing about hymenopterans. Ants are secondarily wingless. So ants have lost their wings in some lineages. There actually are some alate or winged ants out there in the world, but many ants do not have wings. But it's because they've lost them, not because their ancestors never had them. Our last of the 7 big orders are the butterflies and moths. Lepidoptera means scale wing, and that's because these colorful patterns that you see on the backs of these insects are not caused by anything that's produced by the membranous wings. There's membranous wings underneath there, but they're covered with thousands of tiny little colored scales that if you ever handled a moth or butterfly, they kind of feel greasy, and that greasiness comes from shedding the scales as you rub them and kind of wreck their ability to fly. But here is a tiger moth, and here's a tiger swallowtail butterfly. Very diverse group of insects, the lepidopterans. How do you tell a moth from a butterfly? There are taxonomic reasons. There are many families of butterflies and families of moths. Typically, but not always, moths are night flyers and butterflies are day flyers. And the bodies of moths tend to be a bit more robust and shorter, while butterflies tend to have longer, more robust bodies. But one thing I like to point out is if you ever try and draw a moth or butterfly from now on, be sure and draw all the wings as being attached to the thorax, not to the abdomen. Okay? So that's something you should take away from this class, if nothing else, and hopefully a lot else, but always draw your moths and butterflies with the wings attached right to the thorax. Our last phylum of Ecdysozoans is a small phylum, only 3 known species, and it's a weird phylum. Kept very well hidden. We only discovered it in 1995, This is the Cycliophora. Cycliophora means bearing a wheel because their mouths are kind of round and covered with cilia. These are found around on the hairs on the mouth parts of lobsters. So talk about being hard to find. They certainly were hard to find. So they have a very complex life cycle, but here you can see they've got a male, which is much smaller than the female, that remains attached to the female and fertilizes her in that way. And like I said, only 3 species of this phylum have been found, the Cycliophora. But we do know that they are ecdysozoans, just like our other 3 phyla. So that's it for ecdysozoans. Next stop, deuterostomes.